Hi, I'm Steve Newberry, member of Northwest Wood Turners. I've been turning wood since approximately 1995, so I guess that's 25 years or so. And today I'm turning a Kuksa, which is a traditional Norwegian drinking cup, although this one isn't quite traditional. The traditional models have a carved handle that's off to the side that has holes that you put your fingers through to hold on to. This one has a wing-like handle. I've seen Kuksas that were turned online, but most of those Kuksas, the inside of the bowl is turned and then it's taken off the lathe and the outside is carved with a combination of bandsaws and sanders and shaped to final shape. My goal today is to turn the entire Kuksa on the lathe and only do a little bit of finish work on the handle with a sander. You need to make your initial sphere as perfect as possible so that when you turn it on axis and hollow the center, the wall thickness is fairly consistent around the sphere, otherwise it doesn't look quite right. The handle is an integral part of the original piece of wood. It's not glued in, it is turned off center. And final shaping is done with a sander. One of the challenges is trying to make a nice final shape, having this curve transition nicely into the bottom, and of course having the bottom convex and thin, but not too thin. We'll be starting with a cylinder of wood and turning into this shape. Ultimately to change this into an octagon and then to transition the octagon into a freehand sphere. Now usually when you're hand turning a sphere, you'll approximate the sphere and then trap it between two cup centers and you'll turn it on different axes to make it completely spherical. We don't have the luxury of doing that because we're using these spigots here to make the handle. And the handle is an integral part. It's not glued on or drilled in and glued in after the fact. It's made out of one of these, turned with the workpiece in an off-center position, approximately 90 degrees from the original center. So to start, we turn this cylinder with these two spigots off either end into an octagon. The dimensions of the octagon that contains a perfect sphere, the diameter, this is the lathe axis here with drive center and rotating center, and the distance on this sloped portion here on a horizontal plane is 0.293 times the diameter, and then that central portion, because it's not on an angle, is a little bit longer. It's 0.414. So you can approximate that with roughly 0.4 and 0.3. And for ease of calculation and ease of setting my calipers, I've decided to make my cup have a 100 millimeter diameter, which happens to be 4 inches. So this is what I mean by an octagonal shape. It has 8 sides, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the sides are equal in length. So if you take a length of this top surface, that is the same length as this face and the diameter of the spigot, so that there are 8 equal sides in silhouette. Now this piece also demonstrates the importance of wood selection. You don't want to use something that has a large defect, so this one would be a bigger challenge to make into a cup than you'd probably want. The next step after you form an octagon is to smooth out the edges and make a sphere, and then to make a cove that leads into the octagon that will ultimately become your handle. So I've set my calipers to just proud of 0.41 centimeters or 41 millimeters, and that's how I set my distances for these spots here. I've set my calipers for half of the facet distance. So the calipers are set for just proud of 20 millimeters, and that's half of the 0.41, the 41 millimeters that each face is going to be ultimately. My main cylinder is 100 millimeter diameter. It's 100 millimeters in length, and I've marked the center point. The spigots are 0.41 times 100 millimeters, so they're basically 41 millimeter spigots. I'm marking 20 millimeters on either side of center line. And my initial goal to make the octagon is to join this line with this junction between the spigot and the cylinder. I'll be doing that today with the skew. I usually turn with a curved skew, but in this instance I like to judge the flatness of each of those facets, and I find that a little bit easier with a flat skew rather than a curved skew. When I put my workpiece on the lathe, I get used to the idea of grabbing the tail center and driving it into the workpiece a little bit so that it burns its way in, and that holds it more securely on the lathe. I do that especially when I'm turning something off center. This one isn't off center yet, but you'll see me doing that. I like the Nova live center because the outside is connected with the cup center, whereas the one way you have to put a bar through the live center to make it stationary. So when making this particular cut, you need to introduce the point. You can rub the toe into that bevel on the wood to judge the angle and judge your stance, where you should be standing to get that angle. And then you need to have the butt end of the chisel, the heel end, laid over a few degrees so this trailing edge never touches the surface that you've just cut. Many of the catches occur if you allow that trailing edge to drift into the surface you've just cut. Then you can't control the skew because you lose bevel support. You touch it up here and it'll roll this way into the workpiece and kick the chisel to the opposite direction that you're cutting. So you can touch the bevel. I'm just touching this part right here, not engaging the tip at all, and then I pull back to the corner. I cant the chisel off clockwise, and then I can follow that surface down. It's being more challenging than it was last night. There we go. You have several options. If it's not cutting quite the way you expected, you can turn the speed up so you're cutting less wood per revolution of the workpiece, or you can stop and sharpen. I just sharpened this on a CBN wheel, but I think I'll take a moment and hone it with a diamond hone. Again, start at the corner, take off little bites, establish your bevel. Keep that top trailing edge from touching the surface you're cutting. I can tell in this surface I'm cutting that it kind of ducktails out at the end so that it's not a flat surface. And the reason it's doing that is that I was allowing the chisel to come forward without raising the handle to complete the cut. So I need to pay more attention to raising the handle at the end of the cut rather than simply pivoting the chisel outward. So now it's a flat surface. Here I can see I have a little bit more wood to relieve or to remove at the bottom than I do at the top. So I'm going to pivot my torso a little bit to my right, and that'll take off more wood at this end than it does at this end. I'll need to start my cut especially light because it's going to get thicker as I hit the bottom. And now I've evened up these two so there's an equal distance to cut on both sides. So I've made an appropriate correction. A little more at the top than the bottom. And again, I can true that up with a shear scrape. So now you can check to see if the facets are fairly equal. Like so. Pretty close. Not perfect, but pretty close. Good. Now I need to turn my octagon into a 16-sided structure, which I believe is called a hexaheptahedron, but I'm not positive on that. The way I do that is I march off the face so that my dividers are set for 1/4 of the distance of one face. And then I'll mark 1/4 on each corner. And because you have 2 quarters in the center here, they'll all end up equal sides again. I'll also need to take this shoulder down approximately that same amount. So I'm going to reduce this from 41 millimeters to 30 millimeters in diameter, taking off approximately 1/4 of it. So we'll start with the marking. I'll darken that with a pencil so it's easier to see. Missed one. and then I need to set my calipers for 30 millimeters. I'm using a 1/4 inch parting tool because I'm not wanting to make a 1/2 inch wide gap that's going down into the base of the handle. I'm going to do the same on the left side of the sphere. I'm connecting this line to this line and this line to the shoulder. I'll need to relieve this corner here so that I have better access. I'm going to take this shoulder off here so that I have better access to that spigot down there, and you also have a better view. Now I'm going to connect this line with that shoulder and this line to this line. That one's always a little more of a challenge because I'm shifting and trying to turn primarily with my left hand, and my left hand is not. It's now a 16-sided structure. I need to take down the spigots on either end to approximately half their current diameter. And I'll take that shoulder down a little bit to get it out of my way as well. Now I'm going to use a shear scrape to take off all of these top corners and turn it into a sphere. The one line that you don't want to remove is the center line. You can get close to it, but don't remove it. So I rotate my body around, come close to the center line, but don't take it off. Keep your handle of your chisel turning and rotating. That's how you get your spherical surface. You've got to pivot the butt end of the handle in a sphere. Whatever pivot you make is translated into a spherical shape on the workpiece. You can look at the profile and decide how close that is to a sphere. Looks like there's a little low spot right here, and there's a little high spot right here, and a little high spot right here. So I'll work on those high spots. That looks pretty good. Okay. So again, let's scrape off the high spots. Try not to scrape off the center line. Rotate the chisel. The color contrast between the cut and the scraped surface tells you where you've cut and where you haven't cut, so you can work on cutting the surface down to where it's all been scraped, and that's where you know you've reached your spherical shape. So this spot that was here is pretty much gone, and I go to the very end. That looks good. Now I need to turn the spigot here to make the bottom shape that leads into the handle leading into the cup. So I need to turn this shape into this shape, and I want to make that so that a finger fits comfortably up against it. Right now it really doesn't. It's held out by that shape. So you want to turn a cove here. Ironic that my catch is with a detail gouge instead of a skew. So as I approach the sphere, I turn the gouge on its side and I do a scraping cut that transitions into the sphere, so I'm not marking the sphere at that transition. And I try to get as smooth a curve as I can, and I check it to see that it's comfortable with my finger. Then I do the same to the other side. I look at the diameter and I judge whether it's approximately the same diameter as the other side. And this one's a little bit large, so I'm going to keep going down. And transition in again into a scraping cut on the side of the sphere to try to maintain the shape of the sphere. Check your finger to see that it's comfortable, and then I move on to sanding. Good. So now I have to decide what parts of the sphere I will keep and what parts of the sphere I will remove. I look at the two handle sections to see if there's any defects or if one is too large or too small. In this case, they're approximately the same size, and I don't see any defects. The sphere itself looks pretty good. I don't see any defects in that either. There's a little bit of figure. You can see these marks here in this lower portion, and there's less in this upper portion, so I think I'll make that figured portion the bottom of the cup that I remain intact, and I'll make this portion that has less figure the part that I remove. So I look at the grain. Here's the flat grain right here, and there's a growth ring here and a growth ring here, and I'm going to center that flat sawn portion right there in the bottom of the cup. So I'm just going to rotate onto that line and bring that into the chuck like so. I have my chuck spaced approximately 1/8 of an inch apart. The jaws are 1/8 of an inch apart, which is roughly the width of the industrial bandsaw that they use to separate the chuck. Now in this instance, I have both handles intact. If I wanted to make a sugar bowl, for example, something that has a handle on each side, such as this, then I'd leave both of those pieces intact, and I would figure out whether they're centered evenly on the lathe by bringing my tailstock up and positioning it adjacent to that handle, and then rotate the handle 180 degrees. In this case, I have them positioned perfectly because I'm on the line here and I have that centered. So I could make a sugar bowl by leaving both handles in place, but in this case I'm making a coffee cup instead of a sugar bowl. So I'm going to choose to use this handle. I'll keep the piece firmly against the chuck as I back off the tailstock, and I'll rotate. Let me get the the tool rest out of my way. I'll rotate the piece in a horizontal plane like so, so that the handle will be coming off above the new center, and then I'll put the tailstock back into place. And I want to check to see that the lower rim of this handle here is above the upper rim of this one, so I can turn this one away. In fact, rather than turning all this away, I'm going to saw it off. So I'm going to lock that into place and use a saw and take that off. And I want to make sure I don't cut into the sphere itself. I'm just cutting handle. So I leave a nub. Like so. Now I turn this and get it seated well in the chuck, and then, like I talked about before, I hold on to the tailstock and or the live center, and I turn the lathe on. Have to have it unlocked. and I advance the tailstock into the piece so that it digs itself in and it is secure. So this is the bottom of the cup, this is the top of the cup, okay? And the bottom of the cup needs to curve in like so, and I've already got that curve, or the bottom of the handle needs to curve in. I've got the curve incorporated, so I'm not going to turn on the top part at this point. I'll wait until later. At this point, what I need to do is make a short spigot that will fit inside my chuck jaws, and I can do that with my dividers, set my dividers for approximately the same diameter that the chuck is open right now. And I mark that on the bottom of the cup. With that handle whirling around, when you're making adjustments to your tool rest, you want to shut the lathe off. Pull the tool rest into position and rotate. You can see if I hadn't shut that off, I would have taken the handle clean off. So pull back and re-angle. So now I have clearance. So now I'm cutting a tenon to reverse this in the chuck. You don't want that to be very big because you're going to need to blend that shoulder into the bottom of the cup. One thing that is easiest done now rather than later would be to go ahead and take off this nub right here. So I'm going to scrape that off while it's in this orientation. You can look at the silhouette of the sphere and you can see that it's pretty spherical. I did a pretty good job of getting it spherical. There's no large false image involved. So I'm going to come in underneath that handle, and it's naturally better to be able to see the handle, and the best way to see it is to get a bright light on it, such as that, and then you can see where the nub is, which is right in here, versus the handle, and you can avoid hitting your handle. That looks good. So now I have the piece gripped by the tenon that I just made on the opposite side. I flipped at 180 degrees. You can see the pressure mark from the chuck when it was turned the opposite direction and trapped between the chuck and the live center. And I have the handle facing sort of forward so that the cup will actually have almost a calabash type shape with the lip curving back in and the handle coming off the top. That means I have to remove this entire top surface of the handle, and I need to do that with scraping cuts, and I need to do them fairly gently or that will split off and we'll lose parts of it. You can see that in this one, for example, I lost the wings off the side of the handle, and so I just used a sander to convert it to a narrower handle. But in this one, we'd like to keep a wider handle, somewhat akin to this right here. And to do that, I make gentle enough cuts that I'm not chipping off these edges. Now remember, this cup was turned in a spindle blank orientation, so the grain is coming through the handle this direction, and that gives you strength longitudinally so the handle doesn't break off here. But these wings out here are fragile, and you can split those off if you take too heavy a cut. We'll see how that goes with this fresh pair. So you can see a white image right there. That's what I'm wanting to turn away. I'm going to use my helmet during this part just in case something comes off at me. Best to use a sharp gouge for this maneuver. About halfway there. So midway through that cut, I'm converting from a scraping cut, this being a shear scrape here, to a bevel riding cut, if there's any such thing as riding a bevel on a surface that's that intermittent. So there I'm making a conversion into a bevel riding cut. So it looks really thick right here, so I'm going to take a lot of that bulk out, but I like the curve that I'm getting right there. You can see where it chipped out just a tiny bit right there, getting closer. Patience is a virtue right now. By speeding the lathe up and slowing the cut down, I take less wood per revolution, exerting less force on the handle, which should give me less chip out and a smoother cut. That's good. You can see it starting to chip out here as that gets thinner and thinner. I think I'll stop there and I can smooth that out with the sander later. So there's some lines where the chisel moved a little bit from revolution to revolution, but there's no tear out. So while it's not an even surface, it's also not torn out except right on this edge. And it still maintains the primary integrity of that wing. It's not like there's a huge piece of it missing like there is on this one. Good. So I'm going to pull the tailstock away, reposition my light, get my life center out of there so it doesn't put a hole in my elbow as I'm turning. All right, I'm going to work on hollowing the bowl now using a 1/2 inch bowl gouge. Actually, this may be a 3/8. 3/8 is my favorite tool. Not much risk of the tool skating as I enter the sphere in this direction because I'm going directly towards the center. That last cut was a little noisy. Maybe put a little bit too much stress on the system, so I took a lighter cut. I need to decide where I want the handle to be in relationship to the opening. I kind of like it where there's a little bit of a lip above the handle for your finger to fit right like that. And so I think I'll stop right about there. I also like this surface, the front surface of the bowl, to be angled in so it's kind of inviting the liquid in, so to speak. There's a bigger risk of the tool skating as you hollow the rest of the sphere. So I'm going to bring my tool rest in closer, and that reduces or improves my mechanical advantage over the lever here so that I can help resist skating. And I also try to keep the point of the tool that's entering the wood perpendicular to the surface that I'm cutting. So I'll make practice cuts, but I'm trying to enter with it perpendicular. I'll start at the center. What I'm trying to do is resist skating like that. So I make a little notch, then I turn the handle, or turn the flute open, and then pull the handle back like you're rowing a drift boat. It's a very Northwestern reference, huh? So enter the wood, establish a shoulder, rub the bevel on the shoulder, try not to do that. So I kind of practice on the center and kind of adapt and get to where I'm not skating, because you don't want that to skate when you're out towards this rim and destroy the rim. And maybe the handle. Always keep in mind that you have a handle rotating out there so you don't get any fingers in there. That's not good. As you get deeper, it's a good idea to start keeping track of how thick you are. So you can see at the edge here, it's probably 5/8 of an inch, and that's thicker down at the bottom. One of the advantages of having left this chuck just a little bit open is that you can get down between those parts of the chuck, and you can measure the bottom and keep track of how thick the bottom is. You have to remember, though, that the bottom that extends below the spigot that the chuck is holding is not flat. It is still spherical. And you have to realize that there's an extra 1/4 inch or so of wood there that it will go away. So if you turn this down to 1/4 inch thickness in the bottom, when you true up the bottom, you'll go right through the bottom. And so you need to make an allowance for that when you're hollowing. So the speed with which I pull the butt of the tool back kind of determines whether I'm taking more wood or less wood. In this case, I have less wood at the rim than I have in the bottom, so I'm trying to take a fairly small thickness of wood along the rim. I'm letting the chisel go deeper, so it's making that undercut edge. And then I rotate through and I take a thicker cut at the bottom, and you can see the shavings are getting thicker. Half inch, 3/4. Probably a full inch at the very bottom. I have my tool handle way out across from me because that bevel points in the direction of cut, and I'm wanting to undercut that edge. That's a nice smooth transition to a heavier cut. Always just a little bit paranoid at this point. Yeah, we're still fine. So I have the rim thickness pretty much where I want it to be. So I'll go just inside the rim, rub the bevel, bring the handle over till I start getting shavings off the tool. Stop and check for thickness. That's good. So now to take out any tool marks. There's some in the very bottom. The rest looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and use this negative rake scraper. As I come around the edge, I roll it onto its side, so I'm getting a shear scrape. You can see those fine shavings coming off of there. That looks good. So I've remounted, I've taken the chuck off the spigot here, I flipped it 180 degrees, and I set it in the first notch of my shark jaws, but you could certainly do that with just standard jaws. I sight down along the top edge of the cup and make sure that it's running reasonably true, and it appears to be running true. I expand the chuck into the opening, not so tight that it splits the wood out. Okay, now I need to turn this spigot into a foot. Remember that I've got about 3/4 of an inch there, and at least, well, 5/8 of an inch, and at least a 1/4 inch is taken up by this spherical structure that extends beyond the spigot. And I'm going to want to flatten that off, in fact make it a little bit concave so that it sits nicely on a tabletop. And when you're doing that, you tend to leave a little bit too much wood right beyond the spigot right here, and it ruins the curve or makes the curve awkward, makes it more like a middle-aged guy with a little belly that's bulging over his belt line. And so you want to be particularly attentive to removing that bulk of wood right in there and blending it with this curve so that you get a nice form to the bottom of the cup. Pays to be a little bit cautious at this point and to start measuring the bottom. So I sneak between the jaws, go to the bottom. I've got at least 5/8 of an inch there, so I can easily turn that foot down and not be in any danger of going through the bottom. Now I need to remove the outside of that tenon because the chuck jaws have marked it black. I'm going to make a curve cut and take that tenon off. And now I need to blend the bottom of the cup with that juncture. So I come around to the side and I view down to see if that's a smooth blend. There's a little bit of a bump right here that I need to even out. This bottom curve is pretty good, but there's a bump right there that doesn't blend as well. So I'm going to shear scrape that. I'm going to bring my handle across, shear scrape that. May even reverse and do a bevel cut up the cup. That looks pretty good. Then I'll blend that with some sandpaper. Start with 100 grit and blend that. I'm going to make a couple of decorative lines in the top of that. And then we'll do some sanding on the bottom of the cup off camera. And we'll show the sanding of the handle on camera. So this is an Abranet disc that is velcroed onto this thick, soft foam pad on a wood faceplate backing that just fits in my chuck. I have a couple different size tendons on the back of this piece of maple so that it'll fit in different chucks, different jaw sizes. And I just use that to smooth out the handle and to take off what remains of the pencil line. Start at the edge, make a nice rolling movement. Then I try to even up the circumference of that handle where it chipped out a little bit, get rid of those chips. Just rolling around. Almost there. So that could use a little additional work there, but basic shape is intact. Now I'm going to take off those pencil lines. Keep it moving so you don't interrupt the integrity, but try to not round over this sharp edge here. Stay away from that. Surprising how deep that pencil line went. Nice thing about that flexible foam pad is it conforms to the shape of the bowl and doesn't leave you with big, huge flat spots. Got that idea from Soren Berger's visit to us a few years back. Skip Burke and I made a set of these right after Soren's visit. I think I'll get the rest of that with hand sanding so that I don't violate that edge. So there you can see the bottom. I left a nice sharp border there so it kind of delineates and doesn't just disappear into the bottom of the workpiece. You can look at the edge on profile, look at the curve and see that it's a nice graceful curve. Transfers sharply into the handle, which is an integral part of the wood. It's not a glue-on piece, and it fits your hand both on lower and upper surface with a recessed lip so it fits your lip properly as you drink. I wouldn't use a real open grain wood that would allow coffee or whatever to leak right through it. I think red oak is one that's particularly open and allows transfer of liquids through, so don't use something like that. This is pear. It should be pretty close-grained and shouldn't allow any leakage. I always like to look at my pieces and decide what I did right and what I didn't do right in the pieces, and that way I learn. I like the form. I left it a little bit thick in the bottom. It's probably just proud of a 1/4 inch right through there, and I'd like that to be a little thinner. The very bottom is perfect. It's probably 3/16 of an inch or so, but right through here I could have hollowed a little bit more aggressively. But all in all, I think it looks good. If your chuck damages or dents the inner surface here, there's a couple little dark marks where the chuck touched. You can take those out with sandpaper, and if it dents, you can put your teapot on the top of the stove and get a good head of steam coming out of the teapot, and you can steam that edge, and that grain that's been pushed down in by reverse chucking will pop out and be flush with the surface. And then you can finish with a food-safe oil like walnut oil, for example. One piece Kuksa, completely done on the lathe.